Hey, what's up? It's Tati and I'm back with another review of Tales from the Territories. This week is Stampede Wrestling, and we had 4 wrestlers associated with Stampede Wrestling telling their stories. Obviously, Bret the Hitman Hart being one of them, being the son of Stu Hart. We also had Abdullah the Butcher. We had No Class Bobby Bass, and also Fred Schultz. I haven't seen him in so long. He was the one that slapped up that reporter after him calling it fake, which was a legendary moment in professional wrestling, at least to me. So Stu Hart was one of the founders of Stampede Wrestling. He was known to be one of the toughest guys in professional wrestling, even though he had a reputation of being really tough and a no bullshit type of guy. Everyone said like no one would have anything bad to say about him. And even Bret stated that when he was in school, one time in high school, his dad went to go pick him up, and they were in the gym, and there were 2 other coaches that did amateur wrestling. And you guys already know there's a difference between amateur wrestling and professional wrestling. And they were making, like, you know, snarky comments and mocking professional wrestling. And it even got to the point where Stu took off his shoes and got on the mat with one of the coaches and stretched him the fuck out. Now, what he didn't know is that although, you know, Stu was in the world of professional wrestling, he actually have a amateur wrestling background as well. So he didn't take that very lightly and showed him also what is so fake about professional wrestling. So one of the things that Stu Hart was very famous for was the dungeon, which was in the basement of his home, and these are where many notable wrestlers had got their training. People from Edge and Christian, Lance Storm, Chris Jericho, Jim Neidhart. I mean, I'm getting like a brain freeze right now, but like so many big names who have gone to have some of the best careers in this industry had gotten a chance to train at the dungeon. And one of the people was Abdullah the Butcher. Now, when he came to Stampede Wrestling, he really helped business pick up. Everyone was coming to see the madman from Sudan, and he had a presence about him that made people so curious and wanted to see him. And from his debut, they started selling out shows. Everyone wanted to come and see what he was like in person. You know, he had that violent demeanor about him, and people were really afraid of him. And Bret, he was really young when he met Abdullah. He was so afraid of him. There was this one time where Abdullah had a match with Stu, and at one point they were outside the ring, and Bret and his friend are sitting ringside. And he is so mad. He's like livid. At this time, he doesn't really understand kayfabe or anything like that. So he decides he's going to start kicking him. He ends up kicking Abdullah 3 times. He's front row, so he's able to kick his feet through the barricade. And he kicked him 3 times. And Abdullah turned around. He's all bloody. Stu is all bloody. And he turns around to look at Bret. And Bret is scared as hell because he's just a young kid. And Abdullah is this larger than life character that just looked like a monster. And on top of that, he's beating the shit out of his dad. So when they get backstage, Stu and Abdullah's backstage, and you know, they're cleaning himself off, and Abdullah's like, hey, you know what, I've never put my hand on any kid before. I would never hit your kids. And Stu looks at him and he's like, hey, do me a favor, next time kill them bastards. And you know, that's just to show how he had a sense of humor. And ultimately his kids ended up joining the business as well, more notably Bret and Owen having the biggest careers out of all his kids and made huge names for themselves. So the dungeon had that reputation of where any pro wrestler would definitely want to go to get training. Some people obviously were able to take the torture, that some people would say, from Stu Hart, and they passed on to have really accomplished careers, while David Schultz stated that he never trained at the dungeon. He never wanted to get stretched by Stu, and even one time ended up having his wife get a wrist lock from Stu while he basically was like halfway down the block just to avoid getting stretched by Stu. So Stu also had a reputation for being a really kind man, and one thing that showed that was once a young guy came over to the house and actually tried to steal his car from his driveway. It was too much snow and ice, and he was not successful with taking the car. And all of a sudden, Brett started hearing a commotion going on, and it's his dad stretching out this young guy. He said that his dad had him for like hours, and instead of calling the police, he made him call his parents. His parents came over and took their son, and Stu offered him a job at Stampede Wrestling where he can make his own money and not steal from anybody. So one of the wrestlers that they had that could have made a huge impact for them was Andre the Giant. Now, he was just this larger than life guy who anybody would want to see in person. And unfortunately, he ended up cutting ties with Stu and Stampede Wrestling due to having a bad experience with Stu's son, Brett, and Smith. So one day he missed a flight and he had to go to another show, which was about a couple of hours away, and he missed the flight. So Stu ended up getting him another flight at another airport, and it was going to be about a 30-minute drive, and they had to make it in basically less than 30 minutes. So Smith decided he was going to drive. Bert got in the passenger seat, and Andre basically squeezed his ass back in the seat and basically couldn't move. He just wanted to get onto the show, and Smith was like, he's on it. He's basically doing like 120 to the airport, and as he got closer to the airport, the police started following them. They saw the flashing lights. They were pretty much at a distance because he was going so fast that they really weren't able to catch up with him. But they're like, no matter what happens, he's going to keep driving and make it to that airport and get Andre on that flight. They actually made it to the airport, and while they were like not even too far, they ended up hitting a really sharp turn, and Brett was like, they were basically on just 2 damn wheels, and that the car could have flipped over, and all he heard was Andre screaming. You know, so can you imagine a guy of that size screaming? I would have been scared as hell. And he just wants to get out of the damn car. They make it to the hotel, and Smith grabs Andre, and they went straight in. And maybe another minute or so, the police were there, and they were talking to Brett. And before they can even ask any questions, they already had that gun in front of Brett's face, and he's scared, but he actually tells them exactly what's going on. And to be honest, if I was a police officer, I probably wouldn't even believe it that they're trying to rush Andre the Giant on a flight. And a few minutes later, here comes Andre and Smith coming out of the airport. He missed the flight, and the police ended up letting them go, but Andre was so upset about what happened. He had never spoke to Stu Hart ever again, never wrestled for Stampede ever again. And Brett had also made some attempts to speak to him when he did join the WWF, and unfortunately he was not really wanting to talk to him because of that experience. And Brett was kind of, you know, puzzled, like, yeah, he was in the car, he wasn't driving, so why is he mad at him? But he did held a grudge for quite some time, but ultimately later on they did start a little bit of a friendship, so he did end up talking to Brett at some point. So like all the other territories, not breaking kayfabe was super important to anyone in the wrestling business. So important that we had Abdul the Butcher, who's supposed to be the madman from Sudan, literally having to continue to act like that outside the ring. So he was not able to talk because he wanted people to really believe like he couldn't speak English. He was born in America, lived most of his life in Canada, but he had to play this off even outside the ring. So he would go to restaurants and act like he couldn't read, and the waitresses would have to guess what he would want to eat or whatnot. If he was alone, if he was with someone else, they can easily pretend like they knew what he wanted to eat or whatnot. And one day a waitress was just like, bro, cut the shit. I know you can speak English. Like, you don't have to do all that up in here. And, you know, it was really important for them to do all these things, because that's how you keep people invested into the product. And some people were just too into it, where you had people like David Schultz, who had some high schoolers threatened to kidnap his daughter. He's had multiple issues with people in parking lots. People try to hurt him. One time a guy went and threw a stone at his car. He didn't get a chance to throw it. David went to his truck and grabbed a hockey stick and whacked him with it. And then that dude's brother came out their car and he was like, hey, you can't hit my brother. And he got whacked upside his head as well. So it's like, you know, if you don't sign a contract saying that you can't physically touch me, then it's all fair in games if you put your hand on me or destroy my property or anything. And some people, however they perceived you inside the ring, they would think that's how you are outside of the ring as well. And even though it was so important for them to carry on like their character, for the most part, people just believe like however they were in the ring, that's how they are outside of the ring. So people could not separate that from reality. So one of my favorite stories they talked about was David Schultz. He had left to go to the bathroom and he left his cup of coffee in the dressing room. Then he came back and drank it. And about 20 minutes later, he felt like he had literally been drugged. So he was asking everybody, he was like, look, I don't care what y'all put in my drink, just tell me how much of it did you put in. And no one wanted to say anything, because obviously no one wanted to admit that they were in on it. So he's like, all right, I'm gonna leave it alone. And a week later, he's home with his wife, and his wife is baking cookies. And he's like, can you make more cookies? And while she's, you know, getting everything ready for the cookies, he grabs a box of X-Lax. X-Lax is laxatives. And he just took all of them out the box, and he's crushing them all so he can mix in the dough so that they can make those cookies. So she helps him make those cookies, and he takes them to work the next day. And he also put on top some of the good cookies from the first batch his wife made. So he's like, he had to play it off and eat one of the cookies so they can believe, you know, that if anything happens, that he's not in on it. So they all are getting multiple cookies and everyone's eating. And then the next day, everyone comes back to work. Everybody's running in and out the bathroom. And David is pretending that he also has to use the bathroom as well. And he's like, this was not enough. Like, he felt like he had to do more. So he ends up making another batch, this time with horse laxatives, which would obviously be way worse than using X-Lax. And, you know, playing ribs on other wrestlers were something that happened very often. Some probably a little bit more serious than others, supposed to be harmless, but I would definitely not like if somebody were to put either drugs in my drink or to put laxatives in some cookies, and to the point that I'm literally in the bathroom all day, all night. So another rib that was popular was known as Mabel parties. These are when other wrestlers are in on the joke and they get a woman who's also in on the rib. Let me say that. Basically, they would just pretend that she's somebody who, you know, just want to hook up or whatever. You know, those wrestlers were sleeping around with a whole bunch of women. And so they would pretend that, hey, you know, she's home alone and nobody over there. You can go ahead and mess around with her. And while he's in the middle of doing that, then all of a sudden her husband comes back home out of the blue, and he got a shotgun and he'll shoot the gun or whatnot. And to be honest with you, it sounds really, really serious if it's a real situation. Like, you're not going to want to be at another man's house with his girl. And I could see why somebody would take that seriously, especially if they have a gun and they're shooting. However, it's like, you being in the wrestling world, you almost would think, maybe this might be a joke. But obviously, if there's a gun involved, you're not going to want to find out if it's a joke or not. You'll get the hell out of there. Other wrestlers have also talked about this type of rib and how this would actually affect certain people, because even though at the end of the day it's a joke, like, to be in that type of situation can kind of fuck you up mentally. So now we're towards the end of the episode, and they're basically giving a brief, quick reasoning as to like why Stampede Wrestling went under. And basically that last 5 minutes was about how Bad News Allen, later on as known as Bad News Brown, went and made decision on his own that he shouldn't have made, that ultimately geared a lot of fans away from Stampede Wrestling. So he used to tag with David Schultz outside of Stampede, and once he got to the territory, David claims that he was, instead of like being a partner, he was more of trying to dethrone him or whatever, and just be more of that top guy. And at some point he ended up tagging with someone else at Stampede. Now, he had a match where he obviously wanted to be he wanted to generate a lot of heat from the fans while helping his tag team partner become face. And during that time, he asked one of the Hart brothers, I can't remember who it was, he wanted to use a fork and basically attack his partner with the fork. And this is something that he used to do in Japan, and he was advised, like, don't do that, like, we don't do stuff like that here, that can get you into trouble. So he made it seem like he wasn't going to do it, and ultimately he actually ended up using that fork. Now, yeah, the fans are not happy about it, and you want them to feel that way. You want him to have that heat, because he's ultimately helping out his partner change the face. Now he's getting out the ring and he's leaving, and there's this fan. He's a 90-year-old fan who's been coming to Stampede Wrestling for God knows how many years. He's always sitting at the same spot. Everyone knows him, and he hits Bad News Allen in the back of the leg. And obviously, my honest opinion, wrestler or not, if someone would have hit me and you're not being paid by Stu Hart and I'm not in on it, you're gonna catch these hands too. So he ended up hitting the old man, and that upset a lot of people because everyone knew him, and obviously because of his age and a young dude hitting on a younger guy, and people did not like that at all. And honestly, to be honest, I would have done the same thing. Maybe if I turned around and got a quick look at him before I started swinging, like, I probably would have thought about it and probably not hit him. But I could totally understand why something like that would happen. Like, I feel like they went and talked about this part so quickly that it was a little hard to understand, like, how they would put like a really big blame onto Bad News Brown, where people just, I understand, like, people didn't like the violence, and they, that ultimately steered them to go watch something else or whatnot. Even certain people didn't even want to work there anymore after that happened. And there was even another incident that happened, I believe, the next night, where he hit a fan with a chair, and that fan had also touched him first. So if that's the case, why blame him? I'm pretty sure they're going to be like, he should have been responsible and not been physical regardless of what happened, because he's representing the company, whether he's a face or a heel or whatnot. He's representing the company and should not have done that on his own. Now, honestly, I would have done the same thing, or at least initially thought of doing the same thing. Ultimately, within months, Stu ended up selling Stampede to WWF and ended up getting it back, I want to say 88, 89, something like that. And things was just not the same after that. So obviously Vince acquired that again and ended up getting some of their biggest names. And it's just so crazy. Like, I just hate, like, it always seems like at every episode they really rush the ending of the show. So certain things people might misunderstand as far as when they start going into details on why that territory obviously didn't make it. This was a good episode altogether. It was really nice seeing these guys. There was a part where Abdullah stated that his last check from Stampede Wrestling, he never got it, and that he would like to have it. So Brett was like, okay, I'll see what I can do about that. And then towards the end of the episode, he's like, Abdullah was like, oh, you know, I was just joking about the check. Really, I just want the cash. So that was really interesting. And, you know, he's like in his 80s right now. It's really great seeing these guys still kicking and thriving. Got a few more years left and then life is short. But it's great to hear these stories from them. So next week we have the Hawaii territory, and I'm so interested in that. For some reason we don't really get to hear much about that, but some of the best wrestlers, some of the most influential wrestlers that still have a huge influence in this business came from, you know, the Polynesian Islands, and I'm so excited to see that episode. Hope you come next week and watch my review. Bye.